Virtual Insanity 녹음 1일차 시작하도록 하겠습니다.
Virtual insanity. Love them or hate them, virtual meetings are here to stay.
Love them or hate them, virtual meetings are here to stay.
Georgina is in no hurry to get back to the office.
Georgina is in no hurry to get back to the office.
The 37-year-old who works in financial services in Geneva
The 37-year-old who works in financial services in Geneva
has been working from home for most of the past year.
has been working from home for the most of the past year.
Doing so allowed her to skip her commute,
Doing so allowed her to skip her commute,
wear tracksuit bottoms,
wear tracksuit bottoms,
and avoid awkward conversations about her pregnancy. She is now on maternity leave, but her colleagues are trickling back into the office. Meetings all still take place via Zoom. Her colleagues dial in individually from their desks. So those working from home do not feel excluded. But Georgina worries that as restrictions ease, people will rush back to their pre-pandemic ways, and that working from home will once again be the exception. Video conferencing platforms such as Microsoft Teams and Zoom now so ubiquitous it has become a verb, made remote work possible as COVID-19 spread,
when COVID-19 spread
and countries locked down. Staff once needed permission to work from home.
Staff once needed permission to work from home.
Now they needed to go to the office. All kinds of work that once took place in person, from yoga classes to medical appointments, have moved online. The daily number of participants in Zoom meetings has jumped from around 10 million at most at the end of December 2019 to more than 300 million 4 months later. The shift has been good for the planet. Video conferencing uses less than a tenth the energy required for in-person meetings once travel and equipment are accounted for. The benefits for people in terms of their mental health and relationships with colleagues
are less clear.
Some have come to enjoy interacting through screens. Others are exhausted by their colleagues' inability to master the mute button. However people feel, virtual work is here to stay. Says Sudal Neely of Harvard Business School. The trick, she argues, will be keeping the good parts and finding workarounds for the bad. A year into the pandemic, many are suffering from Zoom fatigue.
A year into the pandemic, many are suffering from Zoom meeting.
New research from Stanford University has laid out the science behind it.
New research by Stanford University has laid out the science behind it.
The first problem with video calls is that they force people to stare at their colleagues in close-up. The first problem with video calls is that they force people to stare at their colleagues in close-up. Talk to someone on a laptop using the default configuration on Zoom. And their face appears as big as it would.
And the face would appear as big as it would.
If the two of you were standing 50 centimeters apart.
If the two of you were standing 50 centimeters apart.
At such proximity, the brain is hardwired.
At such proximity, brain is hardwired
to expect either a punch or a kiss. Endless eye contact makes the experience more stressful still.
Endless eye contact makes the experience more still.
People rarely lock eyes for long during meetings in person.
People rarely lock eyes for long meetings in person.
On video calls, participants peer into their screens constantly.
On video calls, participants peer into their screens continuously.
And then wonder why they feel as though everyone is staring at them. Jeremy Bailenson, director of Stanford University's Virtual Human Interaction Lab. Jeremy Bailenson, director of Stanford University's Virtual Human Interaction Lab.
Jeremy Bailenson, director of Stanford University's Virtual Human Reality Life.
And the study's lead author. Compares the experience to cramming co-workers into a lift. And forbidding them to avert their gazes.
And forbidding them from
video conference.
And forbidding them to avert gazes.
Video conferencing also eliminates important non-verbal communication.
Video conference also eliminates another important non-verbal communication.
People nod dramatically in an effort to send non-verbal cues.
People nod dramatically in order to send non-verbal cues.
That in face-to-face meetings they send naturally.
But in face-to-face meetings they send naturally.
That is tiring. In real life, you can see your colleagues fidgeting. As your presentation drags on. That is less obvious online. People speak 15% louder on video calls than they do in person.
People speak 15% louder in video calls than they do in person.
Which becomes exhausting. Delays in transmission, common when internet connections are spotty.
Delays in transmission are...
exhausting.
Delays in transmission,
common when internet connections are spotty.
Delays in transmission, common when
make
internet
communication
make communications harder still.
A gap of just 1.2 seconds. Makes participants seem less attentive, friendly, and conscientious. Building trust without these social cues is difficult. Says Paul Fisher.
Who is he?
Mr. Fisher, who teaches negotiation at the Side Business School at Oxford University.
Mr. Fisher, who teaches at Oxford Business School
has recently started a module on virtual communication. Every late response to an email and glance to the side on a video call breeds suspicion.
A glance to the side of a video breeds.
Virtual negotiations are more likely to reach an impasse, Mr. Fisher says.
Virtual negotiations are more likely to reach an impasse, says Mr. Fisher.
As negotiators struggle to understand each other's emotions and grow frustrated.
As negotiators
struggle to understand each other's emotions and grow frustrated.
As negotiators struggle to understand each other's emotion and.
The constant image of yourself on such calls is also trying.
The constant image of yourself
on such calls is also trying.
The
constant image of yourself on such calls is also trying. The constant image of yourself on such calls is also trying.
The constant image of yourself on such courses are also trying.
In June 2020, Gabrielle Pfund at Washington University.
In June 2020, Gabrielle Pfund of Washington University
surveyed women, narrowing her search by sex. Because women often report more issues around body image than men.
Because women often report more issues about their body than men.
And found respondents reported spending on average.
And found that respondents spend more time than average.
40% of their time on video calls looking at their own face.
40% of their time of video calls looking at their face.
Endlessly scrutinizing your wrinkles and puffy eyes. Is not good for your self-esteem. Virtual meetings have proved a mixed blessing for women in other ways.
Virtual meetings have improved
a mixed blessing for women in other ways.
Virtual meetings have mixed.
Women in other ways.
Virtual meetings have mixed blessing for women in other ways. Mixed blessing.
In one survey of women working in engineering and technology. One survey of women working in engineering and technology. Almost a third of respondents said they were talked over.
Almost a third of respondents said that they were talked over.
Or ignored more frequently.
Interrupted and ignored more frequently.
During such conferences than they were in person. But virtual meetings also free women from tiresome Bobby, who is high up at a big consultancy firm, describes herself as petite. She does not miss being sized up in meetings. Deborah Tannen, a professor of linguistics at Georgetown University, points out that deciding what to wear to a virtual meeting is less of a minefield. You don't have to worry about how long or short your skirt is, she says.
You don't have to worry about how long or short your skirt is, she says.
The past year has also shown that, to the surprise of some bosses, many people labour harder when they barely have to get out of their pyjamas. According to a study of 3 million employees at 21,500 companies,
다시 듣겠습니다.
3 million employees at 21,500 companies,
according to 3 million employees of 20,000 companies,
published in September by Harvard Business School.
Published in September by Harvard Business School.
They worked longer hours, dealt with more emails.
They worked longer hours with more dubbed emails.
And attended more meetings, a dubious measure of productivity.
And attended more meetings, a dubious measure of productivity.
When the pandemic struck and work first shifted online.
When the pandemic first struck and work shifted online.
That will make it harder in future for managers to refuse.
That will make it harder for managers in the future to refuse.
When employees asked to work from home.
When employees asked to work from home.
One of the big questions last March was.
One of the biggest questions last March was.
Would people essentially watch Netflix all day?
Would people essentially watch Netflix all day?
Says Jared Sapato, head of modern work at Microsoft.
Says Jared Sapato, the head of work at Microsoft. 끝났습니다.